Welcome to Boldness Talks, a podcast series created by the Winnipeg Boldness Project, where we check in with leaders, organizations, and partners in our community and the important work that they're engaged in. The Winnipeg Boldness Project is a research and development project that aims to improve outcomes for young children in the Point Douglas community in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Social innovation is the act of developing new ideas to solve complex social issues, such as poverty, homelessness, and racism. Boldness uses different tools and processes from the practice of social innovation to develop community-driven solutions to help children in Point Douglas succeed and thrive. One of these processes is called the Social Lab, which brings together diverse stakeholders to problem solve around a complex issue. Make sure to visit winnipegboldness.ca to check out the Social Lab process we use and learn more about what Boldness does.
Hello, Levi, and welcome to Boldness Talks.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. When Cheyenne asked me, I was just like, well, I get to hang out with Diane for half an hour? That sounds fun. I'll do it.
Yeah, it's always fun when we get to hang out, and I mean, a little bit less so in person these days, but yeah, we'll take the online stuff, absolutely.
Exactly. Take what you can.
So, Levi, you are over at Sunshine House.
Right across the bridge.
And so for those of us who might not know as much, can you tell us a little bit about Sunshine House? What is it that you do there?
So I am the ED, and I've been the ED here for about a year and a half. The Sunshine House is just a community drop-in rec center where people can come in whatever shape they want to come in. So people can come in high, they can come in drunk, they can come in sober, they can come in upset, happy, and it's just a place where people can build community, eat food, and express themselves, and also get the things that they need to kind of survive. We follow a model of the drop-in that's very similar to an auntie's house. So like a lot of us growing up I have a large flock of aunties who were very, very important in my life. And I know that growing up, I could always go to their house and there was always going to be food. There was always going to be people who are similar to me, whether in age or interest. And there's going to be loose rules around just respect and treat the space with how you would treat your own space, and then kind of come and go as you want. When somebody walks into Sunshine House, it's very hard for them to even decipher who's in charge, because nobody's really in charge. It's just, we're all just kind of there.
That's amazing. I love that concept of Auntie's House. And you know, there's another group, the Gwaikunnimud Collective, that's running Granny's House, which is very similar, right? It's just a safe place for people to go, and you know, if they want to just hang or they need some help or anything like that. I love that concept.
We have 4 to 5 main programs. On Sundays, we open for community brunch. It's mostly utilized by people within walking distance. So anyone who's in like the West Centennial neighborhood, they'll come by, and it's suggested donation of $2, and kids under 12 eat free. So we have about 20 to 30 people who will come through on a weekly basis. In the summertime, and then in the wintertime, it's a little bit slower. And then on Monday and Wednesdays, we have an afternoon drop-in, and that's primarily for folks who have experience with homelessness and people who are categorized as multi-substance users, so people who will use a variety of different substances in their life. And then Monday and Wednesday evenings, we have our Like That drop-in, which is geared for people who are 2S LGBTQ+, and it's just a place where people can build community. All of these programs have origins in the community, and they're designed out of community need, what people tell us. And then finally, we have like a primary health program called Street Beat, where once a week we'll have a street nurse come in and they will provide primary foot care for folks. And so in regular circumstances, that's kind of what our week looks like. Right now, it's very irregular and very weird times and very hard times for so many people. We've been fortunate enough to extend our hours and extend our services through different grants through the Winnipeg Foundation, United Way, and Homelessness Winnipeg to allow us to provide a variety of services. So right now we have a food security program. It emulates like an online shopping experience. They can kind of pick culturally relevant food that they would like, because we work with a lot of newcomers and we work with a lot of Indigenous people. There's some congruence in terms of staples to the diet, but there's not a lot. And so we want to make sure that people have access to food that is not just going to sit there and go to waste. We also have extended our hours, so we double our services. We're open from Saturday to Wednesday, and then we take Thursdays and Fridays off because we notice that there's a lot more other things happening. We're still here at the office, but we're not open. So people can come by and they can ring the doorbell and they can grab harm reduction supplies, or if we have any extra food, we can give it to them and kind of send them on their way.
I wanted to maybe pick up on that a little bit when you said all of your sort of services and resources and programs are really designed around community need, things like flexibility and, meeting for people where they're at. How do you think that the folks who come to Sunshine House and use Sunshine House or who hang out at Sunshine House, why do you think that's important to them, or is it important to them?
I think it's super important to them. I think that a lot of the folks who use Sunshine House have spent most of their lives in positions where people are always taking away their power and their sovereignty and their independence. And so to be able to enter into a space, even if it's scary and it's nerve-wracking at first, but to know that you have the ability to shape everything that can happen there, because that's just how things have always been designed. And my predecessor, Margaret Orman, that was her thing. Her thing was she didn't want to create an organization or operate an organization that was just doing things because that's where the money was. She wanted to be doing things that made sense and filled gaps. And then if we weren't able to continue those services, establish it and then maybe pass it on to somebody else who might be interested or capable of doing that kind of stuff. But going back to the original question, if you think about the day-to-day life of somebody who maybe is a solvent user or maybe is homeless and a solvent user and Indigenous, and they're constantly, any space that they walk into, there's a certain set of written rules and practice conventions that people have to follow that slowly or quickly remove any kind of power and autonomy they have over themselves, and really enforces power imbalance because of a person's position in society. And then of course there's the familiarity around it, trying to build a familiarity around this idea of like the auntie's house. That's a thing that hopefully resonates with so many people who might have had that in their lives. I think the other thing is that when you go about these things in a good way, it really recognizes the sacredness of relationships that you have between ourselves as service providers or as community members who have a little bit more power on a day-to-day basis, and then other people who are constantly in a struggle to just maintain a baseline level of independence and autonomy.
And again, that resonates so much with lots of what our community wisdom tells us and what we've learned a lot at Boldness. We need to recognize for sure that those power structures are there. But when you sort of work the way you're working, Levi, it really is trying to center relationship, which when you're trying to center relationship, it tends to not lead you down the road of power over each other, but it leads you down the road of being in balance with one another and being, in good relationship with one another, which tends to then, again, not have that imbalance of power when you're in a reciprocal mutual relationship. As you know, Winnipeg Boldness is trying really hard to solve some complex social issues, and we really do strongly and firmly believe that centering Indigenous wisdom is a way to go about solving some of those complexities. So you said a lot of your resources and services are culturally relevant. So I was wondering, again, what is the importance of that, or why is that?
I struggle a lot with the term culturally relevant because I think that everything that I try to do is culturally relevant because that's just who I am, right? But I also think that when we strive as, I see a lot of organizations who strive to be culturally relevant and miss them. It's kind of that, I forget the academic's name, but she talks a lot about boardroom smudging and how boardroom smudging is just like this very superficial way of being culturally relevant, checking off your boxes, but then also to ensure that you're actually operating a space that promotes cultural rejuvenation or cultural renovation or cultural restoration or whatever it is whatever our word we're looking to do. For us here, and particularly since I've entered in this capacity, knowing that over 90% of the people that we work with who are Indigenous, it's really, really important that we have more Indigenous people at all levels of decision making so that multitudes of Indigenous experiences inform what it is that makes up the cultural relevance for Sunshine House. Because there's no one cookie cutter form for Indigenous cultural relevance, and this, people bring a lot of different experiences. And so if we're working primarily with folks who are marginalized in a variety of different ways, maybe they're marginalized from other culturally safe spaces because of substance use or other things. So we're just trying to find ways to bring in and infuse our work with Indigenous ways of being and knowing. And that doesn't come from me. That comes from people who have experience. And that is the community.
I want to take us to the COVID conversation here, but I always find it super interesting that you talked about how you've actually extended your hours, in a time where so many folks in our city and in our country are having to shut down, that lots of our folks who are doing, again, the important work like you're doing, are actually extending their hours and extending their services beyond what they normally do. And hats off to like End Homelessness Winnipeg and Unite Away and the Winnipeg Foundation, who have all been, in my opinion, super responsive to the needs of communities. So in this COVID conversation, like, I don't know, what's sort of front and center for you?
We were really, really fortunate when COVID kind of came in March. I got a call from the Winnipeg Foundation and said, hey, we would like to give you a little bit of cash to figure out how to deal with this. And so when we got that call, I went back to the staff and I was like, this is what we got. What kind of ideas do you have? What do we want to do? And then we went back to the community, like the participants who we know had housing insecurity and food insecurity, particularly. We went back to them and we said, we got a little bit of extra resources. What can we do to help you right now? People didn't have an answer that day. But then within the week, they started saying all of these places are shutting down. Now we're only able to eat at 2 or 3 places where there's a lot more people. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. And then those services all changed too. So I was like, okay, well, we have this money. Many of you are currently housed. And so that's really beneficial in terms of the grand scheme of things. What can we do? So they're like, well, if you can stay open and then if we can have food, that would be great. So then that's what we did. And so anyone that we had existing relationships with, we provided food hampers for. And then, different restrictions come into play. And so all the time we would just go back to the community and be like, okay, this is what the current restrictions are. This is what we have to do to follow public health guidelines because we're an agency operating under these parameters. What is your kind of solution? For example, when we had the first restrictions go down to no more than 5 people gathering in a space, people were like, well, what if we do sign up sheets and we only stay for half an hour, but then we can come and we can see the people that we kind of want to see. We can schedule our visits that way, and then we can all go back to the places we need to go. And I was like, that was much better than any solution I could have come up with myself. And that's what we did. But then other times where people would be really resistant right before we got the second wave, when numbers were really, really low. And like there didn't seem to be any kind of real reason to continue to limit people's freedom in these ways, right? The long-term impacts weren't obvious for so many people. And we know this isn't a challenge restricted to this group of people. In a situation like this, people have to be intimately impacted, and that's really unfortunate for so many people. But we also know that there's a flip side to that too, in that when we're designing things, we can't shut down and we can't do these things because then we become just another one of those people who turn your back on people when you actually need them. And if we're following a model of community care that focuses on relationships being sacred, one of the things that you got to do is I got you if you got me, and shutting your doors completely isn't that. Setting up boundaries is that. Reshaping how relationships look momentarily, that's love and that's community care, but completely shutting down isn't.
I love that we use the word love. Again, just it's a term that we don't often hear enough about. And so centering love in our work is a great theme, and that relationships are sacred. And Levi, again, what strikes me in a lot of what you're saying, there's something I was taught early on in my career through a really significant mentor in my life. And, I would get all freaked out because I didn't know how to figure out something. Oh my gosh, I would lose sleep about it. And it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to figure this out? And she would always say to me, calm down, it's okay. The community knows. The community will guide you. The community will tell you. And so what you're saying is while we're, this global pandemic, like no one could have ever guessed. And the challenges that it's posing for us, a lot of us are staying awake at night going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And what you've just said there is, you go to the community and the community says, well, here's what we're going to do. And they come up with solutions all over the place. Like I love
all the time.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that that's a community care model. So maybe what I will ask you, here's another thing that I hear a lot of conversations I've been a part of. Folks are saying, there was a lot of things that weren't working pre-COVID. You and I have been doing that kind of work for a long time, trying to say these things are not working for our people. And so there's a lot of these, build back better kinds of conversations about, on the other side of COVID, what opportunities in front of us right now to perhaps do things differently in a permanent way. And is there anything that comes to mind for you on that? Like what might we be doing differently after COVID?
I think there's a lot of indication that things will change. And like you, build back better is such a great phrase, and that's the first time I heard it, so thanks. I'm seeing a lot more sectoral collaboration. There's a lot more recognition for a lot of the littler organizations in the city who are doing work in a smaller scale. and maybe very differently than other mainstream organizations. Now I'm starting to see that our voices are being brought to the table a lot more, which is really good because there's no one Indigenous worldview and there's no one homelessness or substance user experience. And so you need a multitude of different perspectives to shape policy and to shape those things. And so at a higher level, I'm starting to see more involvement of smaller orgs and more space being made for people who bring different types of experiences and perspectives, which is really great. And they're going to be long-standing relationships that will be really important, and not for just to say, oh, we collaborate with people. Because one of the things that really important in the work that we do here is that we want to make sure when we shut our doors and we have to send someone somewhere else, we know that it's a safe space for them. If we treat our relationships with participants and our relationships with other organizations as, of course, these are sacred, and there's a level of accountability and respect and reciprocity there. That accountability piece is key, so that if we refer people to another organization and they come back to us and they say, hey, I had a really shitty experience there, that's kind of on us. We go back to that other organization and be like, hey, this is kind of what happened. Is there any ways that we can get around this? But there's also the positive part of it. When people go to these other places and they tell us how great it was. And that's also really, really important to share and to bring and to let other people know when you can. We know that information happens on the ground through the Moccasin Telegraph still, right? It's all happening through word of mouth, and it's all happening. And so when you have people who are in positions of care and providing services and they work well with one another, then that also translates better to the individuals having better experiences.
I do a lot of public speaking, and I talk about a lot of the values you've just outlined there. And I get asked all the time about, okay, well, those are great values. Like, how do you operationalize those values, or what do they actually look like in practice? And you've just given us all kinds of examples there of what it actually.
You go back to the community.
Yeah.
You ask the community how they want that operationalized.
I want to maybe circle us a little bit back. You know, it's easy to say partnership and collaboration. It's way harder to do it.
Yes.
And to do it in a good way, right? You've given us lots of examples there. And you know, the Winnipeg Boldness Project is a social lab, and one of the main tenets of a social lab is to have cross-sector collaboration. And so recognizing that if we're going to deal with significant challenges or deal with, you know, these really complex issues that we're facing, that we need that cross-sector collaboration. So with that, I want to say again, the Winnipeg Boldness Project is a social innovation lab. And so we're really trying to dive into the tools of social innovation. And Levi, you've always struck me as like one of the best social entrepreneurs in Winnipeg. There's a group of you that I just have so much respect for. And right now, you and I are working with a group of people that are really trying to figure out how we might highlight and grow and support the social innovation ecosystem in Manitoba. I know as a social entrepreneur, you're doing a bunch of work there too, which is very, again, interconnected to all of the resources and supports that you have at Sunshine House. But can you tell us a little bit about the social enterprise world or social entrepreneurial world that you're involved in?
Yes, this world that I'm thrusted into, because we live in this environment where you need money. And money is a finite resource, and it becomes more finite and more finite as you're in a pretty competitive sector. So that was always one of the things that we've always struggled with here, is like, how do we raise funds, but also how do we raise funds that have no strings attached? Because when you have strings attached to your money, that can reduce creativity and that can reduce responsiveness, and it can be inhibiting in some ways. We work with a ton of people who are artistic in a lot of different ways. People love to express themselves in a variety of ways. We have like JD and the Sunshine Band, although the profit generated from JD and the Sunshine Band isn't a monetary profit, it is a human profit. People gain so much from their experience and being part of that. We do have other things that do generate some revenue for the organization. So we've done drag goes, and we've done like one-off drag taco fundraisers. And that's kind of where we got thrusted into this social enterprise world, is because people recognize that there's something really, really unique happening there. And we know that. We're also just learning as we go how to be caregivers. You don't have a lot of time to focus on like, okay, now let's develop a business. But through our relationship with you and through relationships with other queer people in Winnipeg, we got connected with Kaylin over at Purpose Construction. And Kaylin was like, this is it. You got to take this idea and you got to run with it. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And they were like, no, you take the drag taco thing. The drag taco fundraiser is a thing, and it can make you a lot of money, and people want to see something like that. And And we go back to the community and we say, hey, we're going to propose this idea of making this drag taco fundraiser a more sustainable idea. We go back to the people who are going to be primarily impacted, which is the drag queens who use Sunshine House. And they're like, yeah, if it gives us money, if it gives us opportunity to get more paid gigs, more paid opportunities to do drag, we get to grow our art. And then also we get to grow a network of people who might be willing to come to shows or book us for other types of events, then maybe that's a thing that we can do. Within that kind of realm, we realize that the catering business is one thing, and then Kaylin and I and Feather, who works here, we've been working really hard over the last year, again, through a grant provided through McConnell Foundation, just to allow us to kind of explore this opportunity. And then we're starting to develop a business plan that is hopefully going to be able to be launched within the next year or two that centers all of those things that people wanted out of the social enterprise. But it's also completely unique. So it's not just another catering business. I know that when Kaylin first talked to me about like social enterprise, they were like, don't you dare say cleaning or microgreens. And I was like, okay, we aren't going to do any of those things. So this is the way that we're shaping that. And then as we look at these things, we're starting to develop, again, because money is a finite resource for us, it's also a finite resource for so many of the participants. So how can we make sure that people are getting out of it what they're going to be putting into it, as opposed to just getting paid for work? Will there be opportunities for skills building or for training that would allow them to be maybe more employable in other places? Again, that's just using the strengths that we've been gifted here at Sunshine House, hire within the community, ensure that you're doing everything with the community driving it. They have to actually be the drivers.
I find it just so intriguing and wise, whether it's the folks who are at Sunshine House or Sunshine House itself is probably seen as very much in the social services sector. And yet, when you go into this idea of, oh, let's start a social enterprise, that the community almost immediately goes into social purpose conversations. Like the business world right now is really trying to, I think there's a movement towards how are we a social purpose organization, or how might we be a B corporation, or how might we have a triple bottom line? You know, so much of that is happening in the business world right now. And our community just immediately goes there. Like it's so natural for them to talk about those. I mean, they might not use those exact words, no. But the philosophy and the values and the things that underpin what they're trying to do is all of those things. So it's really great. Can you tell me, or just comment a little bit, Levi, about why is it important to have income or revenue that has no strings attached?
Usually with strings, there is a certain level of reporting that's required. I get that. That is important for some people. However, there's a philosophical and practical thing that we've done at Sunshine House and that is core and that people always tell us is important to the way that we have an operation, and that people don't want to be monitored when they come in. So if you start taking a very formal type of attendance, or you have an intake form, that doesn't actually reflect community work in the way that we do community work. It's necessary in a lot of other circumstances, and I don't think that there's no value to doing that kind of process. I think there's a lot of value to it, but here that's just not how we do it. So there's a lot of funding requirements that require us to act in a way that philosophically could reduce people's power. It puts us in a position where we're the service, you're the person who needs us, we're going to dictate to you how this need is happening. And that's not a thing that we ever want to do or we ever intend to do, and it doesn't work. We have a lot of people who will come and expect that. They'll come and they'll meet us with a lot of resistance when they come in, because that's what they're kind of expecting, and they're expecting to be told no, and they're expected to be told they can't come in because they're high, or because they're upset. And that's just not how we do it. We're like, okay, if you're upset, there's a chair in the corner, or there's a fish tank over here, go sit there and calm down, and when you want some food, let us know. Like, that's why we really have to be very thoughtful and intentional about the types of grants that we seek, to ensure that people always have that autonomy and that freedom.
And I think, again, that is such an important point. And I think for me, it's linked to this Back Better conversation, because reporting or the requirements or the strings that get attached to funding, I think, are often framed within this concept of accountability. And I just, back to something you said earlier, I think if we go and ask our community, okay, how might we be accountable for this funding?
Yes.
Our community would come up with all kinds of ways that we can be accountable, and then we can be accountable back to funders. And so what strikes me is that, you listen to a lot of, say, what our federal government is doing, what our provincial government is doing, and certainly some of our philanthropic organizations are doing, they've had to almost throw out all their rules, right? Like in order to be super responsive under COVID, they've just like really trying hard to get the money out the door and trying to be responsive and trying to support those who are doing the work with those who are most impacted. And they've had to throw out a lot of their processes and sort of trust that organizations like yourself know what you're doing, you're serving the community, and it's important work, and you will let them know how you spent the money. Like, you will tell them, right? It'll all be transparent and accountable, and our community can help us figure out how to do that. So for me, that's just another possible Build Back Better kind of idea, right? Is could we think differently about the strings that get attached to our funding, perhaps? I don't know. And so
I think that's exactly right. Like, I think that is part of the reason why we were able to be really successful in this environment where maybe others might have struggled, is that we actually have spent so much time and energy in figuring out and looking at grants and seeing like what has the least amount of strings, that what should we actually put energy into doing. And then when people are like, give us narrative and give us qualitative evidence that you do this work, I'm like, yes, I can do this. We have this. We know this. There's still a level of reporting, but it also allows us to form relationships. And when we tell a funder that, I can't give you the X amount of numbers of people who identify as queer or Black or Indigenous when they immediately walk into the door, but I'll probably know that in 3 to 4 months because that information will have come out in a natural, organic way, how that information needs to come out. That shouldn't be a qualifier for service. The flip side of that, the people who are handing out the money really respect that right now. And I think that you're absolutely right, that if there's one takeaway from this whole being responsive to the community is just here's the money and just show us how you're going to be responsive to the community.
We're coming to the end of our time together. And, I hear this all the time. I get asked this all the time. And I do fundamentally believe that most people want to be a part of the solution. Like, I think most of us don't want to be a part of the problem, or we don't want to be the ones perpetuating the problem. Most of us want to be helping or be part of the solution. So, Levi, what kinds of advice do you have for us, or what kinds of messages can you give us about how might people support Sunshine House and support you?
So my first dive into this work of, like, I guess you said social services before, was through Child and Family Services at Wichita Child and Family Services in Treaty 3. And I started there because I moved back to my community because my grandpa was ill and I was going to help my cousin and my family take care of my grandpa. But so then I saw that there was a job for an office admin person at Wichita. I got hired, and the person who was the ED at the time was George Simard, and George Simard had been involved with establishing Wichita and seen as a leader in Indigenous child welfare across Canada and the United States. And he said, the purpose in all of this, and what we do, Levi, is that you don't have a job at the end of the day and you have to learn something new and do something new. And so I think that has always been the driving force. So I think if people want to think about, in the grand scheme of things, how to best support Sunshine House, is to best support the individuals closest to them and the individuals in their network, and to ensure that you're trying your best to be healthy and to understand relationships, but also ensuring that you're healthy and that you can do the work that you need to do and figure it out. We all love differently. Figure out how you can love. And once you figure that out, then do that. And then start building stronger communities and stronger families and stronger sectors. That's the long-term goal. But other ways, just see what people need. If you want to directly support Sunshine House, see what we need. If you want to directly support other organizations who are doing work in different ways, valuable ways across the city, just call them and see what they need.
We really appreciate you taking the time with us to do that. And we're so honored and privileged to be able to share your insights and the community's insights through this platform. So thank you so much. And we wish you much success in that. We know you're going to keep going. So just want to say miigwech for all that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. Like, I couldn't do any of this work without the community, and of course without all of my amazing staff and volunteers. Like, it's just been phenomenal.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow us on social media at WPG Boldness on Twitter and Instagram, and the Winnipeg Boldness Project on Facebook. or visit winnipegboldness.ca for more of our project info.